Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Psychology of Lockdown series. I'm joined once again by George Roche of The Line International. This is the ninth episode in our series. Today, we're talking about cognitive closure. Cognitive closure is the beginning of what grows into cognitive dissonance, and I think, experience it all the time when we try to discuss opinions that are alternative to the dominant narrative, the corporate narrative. And people simply ignore our peer-reviewed studies or our primary documentation or the reams and reams of experts that disagree with that narrative, and they instead feed us lines like, "No, there's a consensus of scientists that believe this, and the science is settled." And clearly that's not true. But they won't believe you. They won't even look at the information that you present in front of them, and that is a huge part of what we've been discussing as mystification. And it's a characteristic that's integral to this whole process of being mystified, essentially being brainwashed into believing something, even though all of the facts in the real world will show you that something different is going on. So welcome back to the show, George, and thank you so much for explaining cognitive closure. How you doing today?
It's great to be back with you again, Doug. On the ninth one, we're moving along nicely here. I appreciate it. Thank you very much,
Mm,
and thanks to everybody who's made their comments on the previous episodes. It seems that people are gaining something out of this, which definitely feels comfortable. It's nice that people are able to interpret the information they're receiving from us accurately,
yeah,
and be able to decipher and relate it to their own experiences.
right. Yeah, I got
This is
some I got some feedback last week from a listener actually who sent the whole series along to her daughter and said it's not even just about talking about politics, but when you know this stuff, you know what's going on in your personal relationships too. So there's been
Yeah,
a
that's
lot of helpful
interesting.
information here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good. Well, that's interesting that that listener would have taken the information and seen how it encompasses not just the political realm but the familial, and
Mhm.
that's great because that is what it is. A great, big, giant, dysfunctional family. Our societies are, and they have significant issues around flexibility, rigidity, and freedom.
Mhm.
When we talk about cognitive closure, we're talking about the faculty of being able to think clearly, being able to make informed decisions, and being amendable to reasoned arguments. Information that may challenge their belief systems must be accepted under flexible terms, not as if they're orders to be obeyed.
Mhm.
We don't have to take what people say to us as though it's an order, but be willing to be flexible enough to consider the information as it relates to your concerns. And if you're not willing to do that, and you're not willing to be flexible about receiving new information, then you have some issues around rigidity. Now, I want to make something very simple and very clear because people have asked me numerous times, how do you know if you're mentally healthy? How do you know if you're mentally unhealthy? That's a very broad stroke question, and it's probably a loaded one. But if you want to make it a little easier to appreciate where you should be, you can easily ascribe this definition to it. Mental health, I'm sorry, mental illness is, sorry, mental health rather. I started properly by memory, folks, by memory. Mental health is the acceptance of reality at every cost. Mental illness is the denial of reality at any cost. So if you wish to apply that simple definition to it, it's clear that if you're not being flexible, or as we would like to call open, or able to consider, or willing to listen,
Right.
all of these are behaviors consistent with a person who's being flexible. Dropping your frame of reference and be willing to take on another point of view or some other data that may not be totally comfortable for you, but you've got to appreciate and respect the fact you want to stay as close to reality as you possibly can. That is what a self-respecting person will do, is say, am I seeing things clearly? Am I operating on murky assumptions or decisions? Am I actually clear on what I'm deciding on? And examine the examiner. Essentially,
Hmm.
ask yourself these questions in your own mind. Am I seeing it clearly? Am I operating on murky assumption? And if you can't say uh, no to those, the best thing to do is to continue to learn. Everybody has the option to learn. We're born human beings with the power to learn and to change our minds. This is not what cognitively closed people are interested in doing. They have found comfort in their discomfort by believing that which isn't true for so long. The option to change now means they're exposed as being a little
Right.
messed up.
Their self-identity gets challenged, and then they're triggered into protecting that.
Now, cognitive dissonance is the order of the day. You
Mm,
see why cognitive closure precedes it. Cognitive dissonance flows right outside of this because sometimes the control rule breaks down life spontaneity rules here. Life spontaneity breaks down the control rule at times when information does get leaked into your mind that you were never really interested in hearing about. And suddenly it's in conscious conflict with the narrative you have adopted for this long, that long,
right.
however long. But now it's getting challenged. Your cognition starts to go, oh my God, information that's more intelligent and more accurate than what I've been believing has entered my mind. Whoa, batten down the hatches here. There's a threat here that's entered the game board. I got to get rid of this threat. How do I do that? You see, this is a person who hasn't done the homework. So they're
Right.
not available. They're not available. They don't have that gentle transition to new knowledge, to new insight, because they've been so rigid and so I'm going to believe this and anything, just because I believe this by that definition, I must reject its opposite. So we're done.
It's interesting because a lot of people do experience high levels of anxiety or even depression when they start to doubt the corporate narrative or the government narratives, and they start to look into some of these, independent researchers that are finding out, different ideas about how reality is put together, whether it's about your country's foreign policy or whether it's about this whole COVID lockdown scenario and the mask wearing and everything else. And when you start to realize that a lot of this is propaganda and it's very manipulative, and you start to look at the independently
Okay.
financed or the independent workers, it breaks people down, right? I mean, people will end up having a period of depression because they've been fooled for so long.
So, okay, that's correct. We got to understand the origins of this stuff. First of all, what are we dealing with today? We're dealing with cult like mentality,
Mm,
Orwellian, uh, communism, communist styles of relating now have permeated our countries. Uh, Anybody think they would see that here? I'm certain they had no fantasy about it. People from all over the globe have come to Canada because we have been notable for our freedom and our humanistic way of life. Suddenly, we have these impediments coming on board. Now, what is that triggering? Remember, right now we have cultic behavior going on, and we have significantly high levels of corruption. That is happening. I would challenge anybody on the notion that, given the circumstances today, the same cultic, we have control over you, we're dominant over you, we control your behaviors, your thoughts, your feelings, what you do, when you come, where you go. These are cultic behaviors.
hmm.
They're not measures that meant to protect us. That's for sure, because the damage being caused by these measures exceeds the damage brought forth by COVID. Those numbers have been clear in conveying that. So we've got to understand now what I said before is go back to the motive. Why? Why would they do this? It's conditioning. And cults condition their people.
Yeah.
They want to control them. While control is an absolute illusion, I mean, you can't control anybody, what they think, what they do, what they know, what they say, how they walk, how they talk. You can't control it. I'll prove it to you. I don't let anybody control me. I really don't. Even in seminars, I've asked people, let's just get into this control stuff. Let me show you that a conscious invitation to control anybody cannot be acted upon when put forth to you as an invitation. So Doug, just for the for the benefit of the listeners and the people who will see this,
Mhm.
I want you right now to control what I'm going to say next. Go.
I can't
How
do
long
it.
is this gonna How long is it gonna take? I don't have all day.
Yeah, right.
uh, Control what I'm going to do next. Go. Hurry up, man.
Yeah, I can't
It'll
do
take a
it.
long time. Okay,
I'm not
so
that
you sit
manipulative.
there, right? So you sit there helplessly when somebody says, "Go ahead and control me," and yet this tells you, in an isolated sense, that control is an illusion. It's a mental creation. You can't control anybody.
Mhm.
You can only be controlled for as long as you allow yourself to be controlled. So we see the amount of slaves to our system. They think what they're doing is necessary. They think what they're doing is absolutely cooperative for the government. It's a lot of Stockholm syndrome, a lot of Munchausen's syndrome going on around here. We got people got to behave like they're sick in order to, be treated as such. They're all complying with this. There's no evidence of a pandemic. The hospitals aren't slam busy. Numbers of their cases now are dropping like rocks. So where's the justification in all this obedience? It's inconsistent with what's actually going on. Would they ever question it? No. Why? Because they come from a family where control, you had that patriarchal father you speak of so
Mhm.
often, and then you have corruption. This is familiar.
Right.
This is so the responses again from yesteryears are as ingrained in that adult today as they were as the child at 10 or 9 or 8. That's where it came from. So it plays like an old broken record. So anything that resembles the past guides the response. So they see that the government is telling people what to do when they should be. Put them in jail. Or arrest that guy. He's not wearing a mask. All this tattletaling, call the police. That's another form of violence. Reprisal in Canada under the law is illegal, right? When somebody's operating, Rocco Galati pointed out very clearly that you can't use Section 4 property trespass. And if somebody's operating under the color and right of law, that stands. You're not at your home. It's not your private property. But people are believing this stuff and complying with it. And they think it's okay. They think this is a normal way to operate. They know no different. They've been
Mhm.
conditioned to believe exactly that what the government is doing, which relates to how they were raised, is perfectly healthy and normal. It's all they know. It's familiar. So they are definitely rigid in their thinking. And since they were told things over and over and over again in the same thought terminating language that didn't make any sense, didn't mean anything, like things like get a life. There's a thought terminating statement for you.
Right.
Right. What does that mean? Can you please tell me the experience you want me to have in that statement? So there's all this stuff just around the cultic and corrupt family systems where language is a very um, uh, dysfunctional method used to condition people to lose their own minds.
Well, I really
Follow
like this, making this connection between cult-like thinking and what's happening to everyone, because in essence the government and these authority figures have become cult leaders, and they are leading people around, and the psychology is not just similar to the psychology of any cult, but it's exactly what happens to people when they are indoctrinated into a cult, where they can no longer say things that deny what the authority figure is saying. All they're doing is positioning themselves to be closer to the authority figure because that's the highest form of virtue. I mean, we could just go on and on about
it,
the
yeah,
similarities
it's a
here.
mountain. There's so much trigger of data related to this stuff. These people that are unwilling to make amendments to what they believe have lost great freedom. These are the people we're seeing a lot of agoraphobia. People are not leaving their houses.
Hmm.
They're not going anywhere because the risk of that virus catching up to them, the belief that it will, is so
Right.
deeply ingrained. This is delusion, folks. This is delusion. It's disorganized content driving these belief systems. It's a belief without any real supporting information. What you're believing is grossly untrue. And what does delusion mean? People toss this word around all the time. Let's clear that up. Delusion simply means that you have a firmly fixed, held, false belief that is inconsistent with reality or data that supports it. And so your content needs adjusting. In order to adjust your content, that requires research. That's why people emphasize, teachers and clinicians and doctors and people in different levels of disciplines, from clinicians, psychology, psychiatrists, etc., all tell people you've got to question everything. You've got to be willing to distrust what you think you know and be willing to digest piles of new information, not for cognitively closed, rigid, corrupted adult children. Not going to happen for them, because they're still stuck where? In childhood. You see, you can't move on if you're still stuck back there. You're in arrested development. Your mind is not free. Your body's not free. You as a human being are not entirely free. You are still being controlled by the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is bringing up a lot of stuff for me because I continuously see these memes that are like, oh, you're a researcher. You think you can do your own research, and even articles in mainstream magazines that says, oh, you're not a scientist. Don't do your own research. But this really goes down to that lack of critical thinking. And then what you're talking about, this you can't control somebody else as long as that person is engaging in critical thinking for themselves, which requires that they do their own research and come to their own conclusions. But if you can convince people not to engage in critical thinking, then you've got them caught. Then they're right there in that cognitive dissonance space where they're not going to even look up anything that maybe disagrees with the dominant narrative that you're trying to push. It's fascinating.
It is. And okay, so we have a lot of critics. People, I've heard this term thrown around by everybody. It's just, you got to be open to constructive criticism. I say that criticism of any sort is never constructive, and it is always based on subjective content of the person communicating it, because they have to look through their own frame of reference, and their own personal experiences are drawn upon to formulate such constructive criticism. It's not constructive criticism. What we're looking for, what every human being needs, is non-judgmental, non-shaming feedback. And feedback is exactly that: non-judgmental, non-shaming. It talks about what you hear, what you think, what you feel, see, believe, want, and need, without attacking the other person. And so what I like to teach people is about the 5 C's. When you want to stop your critic from attacking you, you must speak to the critics like it's their problem. So somebody says, I don't like your, or sorry, they say, why are you wearing those brown pants? Well, you are wearing brown pants. You must like your brown pants. But I walk up and I say, why are you wearing those pants? And they go, well, I like brown pants. What's your problem with brown pants? Well, they're corduroy. So you repeat everything the person who's criticizing you says to you. You say, what is it you don't like about brown corduroy pants? I don't get it. Well, they're bell bottoms. Okay, so what is it you don't like about brown corduroy bell bottom pants? I don't understand your problem.
Right.
Your problem, not my problem. I'm wearing the damn things. I'm comfortable in these corduroy pants. You seem to have an issue with them, and you raised it to my attention. I'm just wondering, what is your problem?
Yeah.
And we've got to protect our boundaries, because what happens all too often is people start getting into a conflict and an argument and a debate, defending themselves. That never works. Best thing to do is understand you're not the one with the problem, and speak to the other person like they're the ones with the problem. They're the ones who are cognitively closed. And inflexibly not realizing you have a choice. You have a choice. It's your choice. It's uniquely your own.
Right. I mean, I have, one way that I've been approaching a lot of this is just trying to express to people that I have concerns that the lockdowns are doing more harm than good. And then it's still amazing. I mean, they'll, by and large, will get triggered, and the idea that that the lockdowns are doing more harm than good is something they can't wrap their minds around as a possibility. Certainly, we're all doing this, suffering all under these lockdowns for the good of humanity. There must be a reason for it. Um, but as long as I express it as a concern, like I don't know this as a fact, but I'm really worried about this. Can we have a conversation about it? And that, maybe that approach kind of tempers. But it's
Well,
amazing because people don't, they ignore my concern, like as if I don't care. Like, I mean, that's just it. It's like I
we got to
actually have
stop
my point of view
We got to
because I
stop.
care.
Right, but we got
So,
to stop walking on eggshells.
right. I know that. I think that's an issue that I have. I actually have that issue. I admit to it.
Yeah, I got
It's
that.
just so difficult to have these conversations with people, and then when they get all defensive and they get triggered, I just, I don't know. It's a frustration for me as to
It,
how to
it
deal with it. It's easier to leave it alone, or I'm suffering from avoidance.
the avoid dance, I call
Yeah,
it.
yeah, right.
Okay, just avoid hyphen dance, and then they avoid their avoid dance. You see,
Yeah.
uh, it's kind of like they don't know that they don't know that they're avoid dancing
Right.
or something. So, so that's kind of funny. There's all kinds of strategies to get out of that shame. There's all kinds of strategies to cover up, conceal, bury. Albeit, when you bury anything, you bury it alive, especially if it's
Uh-huh.
about your inner life. It's not gone. It doesn't even go to Mars or Venus. It's
Mm,
in you, still
right.
there, like the rings of a tree. It remains intact, and it will affect you. You can't outrun it. There's no shortcuts to nirvana. So we got to think it through. We got to feel it through. We got to know it through. You've got to do the right research. This gullibility of people, there's so much evidence that proves the lockdowns are unhealthy. There is a pile, a litany, a plethora, whatever, of
Hmm.
doctors and professional people who have made it abundantly clear that what we're doing to our people, our children, our greatest natural resource, our children, and our economies is reckless. It is a form, absolutely, of psychosis, no question in my mind.
Hmm.
I utterly agree with Dr. Mark McDonald. We had a great conversation the other day about this stuff. There's no question that people have lost touch with reality.
Right. Well, this brings up an interesting point because initially we were talking about being flexible and being open minded. But then the flip side of that, I think there's a yin and yang that we need to explore here because at the same time as being flexible and open minded, it's important to have solid boundaries so that you don't get.
Oh well, we have whoa, 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 whoa. You can't have that flexibility that you speak of without the boundaries.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm sorry for
Yeah.
allow
Well,
the
let's
interruption.
let's let's talk about it.
Okay, so I want you to finish what you were going to say, but I didn't want you to put that in that order because think about it. Every boundaries rests. I'm sorry, all your other skills, your ability to listen, your ability to cooperate and manage situations, the ability to rely on social deafness to offer balanced responses in interpersonal settings, especially conflictual ones. All of those skills depend on having good boundaries. The reason why those things go awry many times between people or groups is because they don't have good boundaries, that the installation of the boundaries has not been complete. And so these conflicts are allowed to permeate growth and development
Right. Yeah. I mean,
and
I've run.
stifle them.
Well, let's talk about this because, just in my own personal experience, I've had to learn because for a while I was like, oh, I want to work on my listening skills and I want to give everybody, a chance to have a valid perspective and I want to pay attention to their needs and concerns. And, eventually I think I was opening myself up for a lot of manipulation because I was thinking that I was listening, but by listening to a bunch of bullshit, right? then then I just ended up opening myself up and I wasn't setting those boundaries as I should. So I mean, like, what do do you see what I mean? Like there's a trap there where you think you're listening, but if you don't have the boundaries, you're just going to be listening to a lot of hogwash and taking it seriously when maybe in your heart it's kind of full of crap. How do you make that distinction? How do you set the boundaries, and then and still listen within the context of having those solid boundaries? Or like you said, you can't actually listen in a healthy way unless you do have these boundaries.
Correct. I mean, I think some of what you swayed over to, it was a filtering thing. I mean, again, no two people hear the same thing the same way.
Hmm.
Uh, the more complex data is, the more we should be using active and passive listening skills, as per Carl Rogers. What I hear you saying, Jack, is what I hear you saying, Michelle, is uh, get the agreement from the other person about what you heard them say before you respond.
Hmm.
This makes more efficient, the staying on the on topic, making sure that there's a voltage. You're talking about the same thing, you're singing from the same sheet of music, if you like. Everybody wants that kind of voltage. When people aren't talking about the same thing, yeah, confusion and misunderstanding, misinterpretation, it's all part of the day. But I think it's important. Good boundaries means you use these skills. Good boundaries means that you call upon them when you want to make sure that you're going to offer a response that's valuable to the other person or the issues that they have raised. So I believe that listening, again, being the skill that it is, requires a deliberate, conscious effort to
Hmm.
say, okay, I'm going to drop my frame of reference. I'm going to actually listen to what this person is saying, and I will clarify anything they tell me that doesn't fully make sense to me, or I don't really understand. There's some parts I need clarity on. I'm going to get clarification before I say a word. Now, if people practice that in all of their conversations, and we being human beings, being perfectly imperfect and still learning and tripping it up and trying to get the ball to the end zone, if everybody did that though and worked toward those ends to practice that approach, we would reduce conflict, and of course we would be far more effective in reaching the goals.
Hmm.
Now that today is not happening and is being done deliberately to us. That's part of the psychological warfare. The moment we start talking sensibly, the moment we start making any amount of sense that exposes the contradictory or invalid narrative that's being downloaded onto us, the moment we show we understand the cracks, that we can crack that code,
Right.
right? You're shut down. You're shut down. You're telling too many truths. You see, that is very crazy making, because people know the truth. They do know the truth, and then they're being gaslit. They're being told, no, 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 that's false. That's our fact checkers checked it.
Right.
It's
Right.
not true.
Well,
You're
and that
supposed to
was
believe the fact checkers, right?
that was actually my next question, was going to be, how are you dealing with when you're dealing with gaslighting? Because when you're working on your listening skills, you're paying attention to someone, and they're actually just, again, they're just bullshitting you. I think um, the mainstream media and corporate and government propaganda are master gaslighters, right? And we can continue with the cult analogy. The cult leader gaslights the followers. The corporate media is gaslighting the vast majority of the population, who are then, because they're listening to the gaslighting, right, are convinced
Well,
that it must
exactly,
be true.
because the new hate speech is telling the truth.
Yeah.
So that's corrupt. That's
Right.
that's cultic. That's all what will shut your mind down, because it's crazy making. Is like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought what I just said made sense. And that your expectations of me to, follow you through your corrupt ideologies is something I should be resisting. But you're telling me no, 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 no. You got to follow what we tell you, folks. Okay, you got you got to adopt our narrative in order for you to be accepted in this brand of society.
Hmm.
And people are like, no, no deal. We don't want that. And others, like we discussed the other day with Dr. McDonald, they're not interested. They're too scared. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their reputation or put their necks out there because they're too busy protecting the material world. Boy, are they on the wrong side of the fence. I don't care about your car or your house. I'm sorry. They're fighting to take control of your world, your life, your family.
Hmm.
Now, if you're over there worried about your car or your house, then are we to assume that those things are more valuable to you, that they deserve more of effort of your protection than you're taking a deliberate stance to defend the integrity of your children's lives going forward? Because when you're not here, what are we leaving behind for these kids? I think everybody who has kids has an absolute responsibility to step up and teach the children, here's how to hold your government accountable. Here's what you need to know about doing that. Here's what your rights are. Right now, they're being attacked, kids. Let's not deny them this. They can see it, they can feel it. They're going to be receiving much experience and pain from this crap that's going on. These ultimately child abuse conduct of these institutions like schools, etc. They are damaging the minds of our children. You want a bunch of cognitively closed children? Keep this up.
Right.
They're being made in the image of already past pedagogical poisonous pedagogical principles, as Alice Miller refers to in her own book, Hidden Cruelties in Child Rearing and the Roots of Violence. There's a great book for you folks if you want to see what the government's going and doing today to our societies. Alice Miller asks, how could Hitler happen? Great question. I encourage everybody to read that. Cognitive closure is a very serious issue anyways. It's not something to be made light of. When somebody is rigid, they're not willing to let in new information. It's a classic metaphor of being stuck. They continue to repeat patterns that are very unhealthy. Their freedom is severely impaired, and so are their relationships.
Well, and I think what you bring up there is so important for people to understand is that the lockdown measures themselves now are going to create an entire generation of kids that are going to grow up to have cognitive closure and do what they're told.
A new
And
farm.
it's going to be triggered by fear, just like this round has been triggered by fear. I mean, it's just amazing to witness the mainstream narrative just scare the crap out of everybody and then trigger them into their own need to, well, now I'm scared, I've got to listen to the authority figure because that's been the conditioning they've gotten their whole lives. And then the authority figure tells you to implement a bunch of a bunch of procedures that are actually going to facilitate the psychological programming on into the future, into the next generation. And it is just amazing. And these kids that are now living formidable years of their lives, 1, 2, 3 years old, learning how to talk, learning how to understand people's emotions. But they're talking to masked people and they're being asked to be masked themselves, and
it,
they can't read lips. They can't read, they can't read the subtext on the emotions that are expressed on the face. And they're told they've got to, socially distance and they've got to be in lockdown. I mean, what an outrageous thing to do to a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5-year-old.
the damage will be lifelong, and those of us who see what's actually going on uh, should find it within themselves to stand up and
Mm,
speak the truth, and don't be afraid. If you're sitting there doing nothing, the mystified opposite of generativity is stagnation. The worst thing you can do is nothing. You've got to exercise your voice and defend our way of life. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. And what are you going to do then?
hmm And what a fascinating characteristic of all of this, that those who are mystified and who do follow the authority figure, then their sense of virtue is attached to this. Like they really think they're doing the right thing by imposing this abusive behavior onto the rest of their community, without listening to
Mhm.
those members of the community that are like, wait a minute, I have boundaries. You can't tell me what to wear. You can't tell me how to interact with my family members or other members of my community, as long as it's all consensual. Um, and so, it's just so strange that the way that sense of virtue is twisted, so that those who are caught up in this spell, this cognitive closure, that can't see the evidence that shows how harmful and abusive these techniques are, these lockdown techniques, and they actually consider it a virtue to impose it on those who disagree. It's fascinating.
Yep.
The cycle of violence
Yep.
continues.
There's no question that there's a significant amount of information that people are ignoring to the effect of everything you just said. And I find it extremely tragic that the schools are adopting these patterns of behavior because at some point they're going to learn that they're harming these children. And these parents that are not standing up,
Hmm.
these afraid people who won't challenge the machine, the system, or call it whatever you want, they're just people to me. And they have a role to play in community. And if their role is hurting children, it's time to stand up and say, that is unacceptable. We're
Yeah.
not going to tolerate this. And yet we have so many people cooperating with it because I've said before, the somnambulant mind, the sleepwalker, is obedient. They're not researchers, they just obey. Why? Because they were told to,
Hmm.
just like they were in childhood. You see, it's virtuous to do what you're told. It's virtuous. Don't question anything. That's not virtuous.
Right.
This show is not virtuous.
You know,
this,
it's
you know.
right. Well, it's just this
So
undying fealty to the cult leader. If Dr. Fauci says, then it must be true, and we all have to get everybody else to conform to what the leader says. And now they have this whole. We've talked about the mythology of scientism. There's even a mythology around the cult, which isn't actually science, because there's plenty of scientific evidence that disagree, and plenty of scientific experts outside of the quote unquote consensus that we keep hearing about, which is not a consensus at all, because there's many scientists that do disagree with this common narrative. But it's fascinating how people stick to it, um, and promote it, and it is a cult-like adherence to the authoritarian leadership, exactly like cult membership or cult indoctrination. It's fascinating.
100%, 100%, and therefore very corrupt.
All right. Well, sounds good, George. We're about 30 minutes in. I guess we ought to wrap it up. We've been trying to keep these to a half an hour. It hasn't always been the easiest thing, but do you want to make a few final comments about cognitive closure and then let people know where they can find out more information about the line?
If you relate to anything, and sure, Doug, thanks, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
If any of you relate to the viewers, if you relate to anything that we've been discussing here, and if you find that you're on a daily basis, you're just not feeling like doing too much, going outside is a chore. You're constantly afraid. There's anxiety. You're in panic mode all the time. It really may be a good idea to, as I've said before, examine the examiner. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. Be willing to go in there and find out what do you need to do to feel better. And I find oftentimes people need to feel better in order to feel better.
Mhm.
That requires you going to you. Start with you. That's where it begins and ends. And try not to, again, digest too much of the mainstream media. It definitely contributes to the cognitive issues that we're speaking of here, especially dissonance. Because when you find out there is information that's available to you that absolutely will make more sense than what you've been believing, be willing to digest it, be willing to consider it so that you can do your best for yourself and your families. You can get us at The Line Media on Twitter, at The Line Canada on Twitter, The Line Canada on Instagram. And if you have anything you'd like to say to me, feel free. Media at thelineinternational.com. Thanks, folks.
All right. Thanks a lot, George. And I'll just let people know that I think it's important for you to do your own research, actually. And you should be, if you like what you're hearing, think about reading some John Bradshaw or some Alice Miller and learning some of this psychology, because it's so imperative, I think, that we understand that we're not really engaging in a logical battle here with people who disagree with us. We're engaging in a psychological battle with people that are suffering from this cognitive closure, and we all need help to heal from this. We talked a little bit about the mental health versus the mental illness, and even though some of us are more healthy than others. I think we all still have some work to do. Certainly, if you were raised inside this patriarchal culture, we're all to some degree trauma bonded to it. I know I continually learn a lot from these conversations with George about my own life. So I really appreciate that aspect of this. And I urge everyone who's listening to do some introspective work on themselves as well, and hopefully have a little more compassion towards those who have been indoctrinated into this mainstream narrative, despite all the facts that at least show that those who have alternative concerns are rational human beings and not just completely crazy. So
Absolutely.
hope you're all getting a lot out of the show, and thanks for listening. I'll just let you know that you can find the whole show at www.theshiftnow.com. I have the series posted under the free content tab, Psychology of Lockdown series. You can also find hundreds of other interviews that I've done, and you can subscribe to The Shift for the full long form feature length versions of the interviews that I do. That's at The Shift with Doug McKenty on that podcast. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter at D McKenty, and I'm on Facebook and YouTube at The Shift or The Shift with Doug McKenty. And of course, always trying to get people to go to the website, theshiftnow.com once again. So hopefully we'll see you there. And we'll be back again next week with episode 10. Do you have the topic for episode 10 on hand, George?
Well, this is an interesting one because right out of cognitive closure, a person who doesn't understand governing scenes, the events that have been printed on the brain, they act them out. This acting out and acting in family violence, belief systems, and emotion.
Great.
So, acting out and acting in is next up to bat.
All right. And I'll be looking forward to that. We'll do it again next week. Thanks again, George. You have a great day.
You as well. Thanks a million, Doug. Have a wonderful one.
You bet. Take care.
Bye bye.